David Carter stood on his porch, facing three men in suits stepping out of a black BMW. The tallest one gave a smug smile, dismissing the warning David had just issued. If you lay a finger on her, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Just 12 hours ago, David had no idea that offering a ride to a drenched woman in a wedding dress would pull him into the orbit of a dangerous millionaire. He had been driving home from a late night at his workshop when he saw her barefoot and soaked on the side of the highway. Something in her broken posture pierced through his caution. Asterisk, please help me, she whispered through tears. Dar, I have nowhere to go. David knew that kind of desperation. It was the same look he wore years ago after being fired from the town's repair shop during a so-called downsizing that just so happened to only affect black employees. He had clawed his way back by opening his own shop on the edge of town. This woman Isabella seemed like she was running from more than just cold feet. Asterisk, she told him she'd left her wedding hours ago, escaping a gilded cage built by her fiancé Blackwood. What she didn't tell him was that Richard wasn't just possessive. He was the kind of dangerous that grew from money, power, and a belief that people were assets to be controlled. Asterisk, the next morning, David found out exactly what kind of man Richard was. The suited men didn't knock, they barged in. Their leader, bald with a scar stretching from ear to chin, didn't waste time. Where's the boss's bride? He demanded. David's anger simmered beneath the surface. It was the same anger he felt every time someone assumed he was a threat just for existing. I don't know what bride you're talking about, he replied evenly, though he knew Isabella was hiding just a room away. The man smirked, called Richard, and held the phone out. A voice on speaker issued a string of threats. Asterisk, most men would have folded. But David wasn't most men. He had rebuilt himself in a world designed to break him, and something in Richard's smug certainty made him stand taller. After the goons left, Isabella tried to apologize and said she should go. David told her firmly, you stay. If your ex wants something, he's going to have to go through me. Asterisk, Richard underestimated him. That was his first mistake. The second came 3 days later when David arrived at work to find 2 police cruisers and a detective with a search warrant for allegedly selling stolen car parts. David said nothing. He knew the accusations were false, and he knew exactly who was behind them. The detective found nothing and left with a mumbled apology. Asterisk, David's phone rang as they pulled away. Did you enjoy the show? Richard's voice was smooth. That was just the warm-up. You've got 24 hours to return. My property. David hung up Asterisk by Tuesday. Customers were canceling appointments. He suspected Richard had made calls. Isabella offered to leave again. David refused. He had noticed how skilled she was at handling finances, filing paperwork, and managing the shop's books. Tell me about him, he asked. She explained. Richard's control how every gift had strings. Every gesture had hidden costs. When she tried to push back, he shut off her access to everything. But what frightened her most was how he treated anyone he couldn't buy. He talked about people like you, she said, like you were messes to be cleaned up. Asterisk on Wednesday. David faced another blow. His landlord, an elderly man named Williams, showed up with men in suits and informed him the building had been sold Blackwood Properties. They offered double the market rate. Williams couldn't refuse. David nodded, already thinking 3 steps ahead. Asterisk, he started collecting evidence. Photos of suspicious cars, records of threatening calls, a log of every event. 8. Richard thought he was dealing with a lone mechanic. He didn't realize David had built his life preparing for moments like this. Asterisk, Thursday. Richard showed up in person, flanked by new thugs. He strolled into the workshop like he owned it. Isabella, time to come home, he said. She stepped out and stood beside David. This is my home now. Asterisk, Richard sneered. You were born for penthouses, not this dump, Asterisk, David answered. Calmly, and you were born to think you own people. You don't own her. Asterisk, Richard laughed in disbelief. You really think you can take me on? I crush people like you.
Asterisk.
But David wasn't intimidated.
Every slight, every injustice
Had taught him patience. Every insult was fuel. And now, Richard had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Asterisk, Friday morning. David received a visit from Agent Marcus Washington from the IRS. David handed over every document, every receipt. He had nothing to hide. As the agent flipped through the files, he mentioned something odd. This was the third black-owned business he'd investigated this month based on anonymous tips. All three had ties to Richard Blackwood. Asterisk, when the agent left, David confronted Isabella. There's something else, isn't there? She nodded. Richard had shown her how his empire worked through corruption, bribes, threats. She had documented everything. I never deleted anything, she said, handing him her phone. Asterisk, David called an old friend, Tomas Rivera, now a respected investigative journalist. They met at a cafe that evening and David handed over the file. This is bigger than I thought, Tomas said, eyes wide as he reviewed the material. We've been trying to nail Blackwood for years. He just gave me what we were missing. Asterisk, the next morning, David found a subpoena nailed to his door. Richard was suing him for seduction, an interference claiming David had lured Isabella to hurt his business. David read the paperwork and smiled. He just gave me legal access to all his company's records. Isabella asked, What does that mean? David replied, It means the hunter just stepped into a trap. Asterisk, that night, David contacted Agent Washington. I've got more documents, proof of bribes, laundering, you name it. Washington asked him to come in the next morning. Asterisk, sitting on the porch with Isabella, David looked up at the stars. For the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter. Do you think this will work? She asked. He thought of his father's. Advice don't fight like they do. Be smarter. Richard made the mistake they all make. He thought I was prey. Asterisk, and aren't you? Asterisk, David smiled. Some prey learn to hunt. Asterisk, the next morning, David woke up ready. He didn't know Richard had spent the night planning something worse. Richard didn't know that the more he escalated, the more powerful his enemy became. David Carter wasn't just defending his life, he was building the case that would bring a king down. Asterisk.